If November felt like buyers had all the leverage in Ione, December quietly changed the rules, and without most people noticing. Fewer homes hit the market, buyers remained picky, and the numbers tell a much different story than they did last month. So first, let's take a look at the stats and dive through what they are, and then we can go through what they mean, whether you're buying, selling, or you're a homeowner. In December of 2025, there were 25 homes for sale. 2 new listings hit the market, 7 homes sold, and 4 went pending, and it took about 74 days on average for homes to sell. Now, when it comes to pricing, the median list price was about $576,000, and the median close price was $475,000. And then the list to close price ratio came in at 96%. Now, when we're talking about what type of market we're in, the months of inventory came to 3.6 months, and the absorption rate was 28%. All right, so now let's dive into what those numbers actually mean. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite stat, home prices. So as I just mentioned, in December of 2025, the median list price was $576,000. The median close price was $475,000. Now on paper, that looks like a really big gap. But the better clue is what homes are actually selling for compared to when they were originally listed. And that's where the list to close price ratio has the real story. And in December of 2025, that number was at 96%. Now, quick reminder, this is nothing to do with the current list and close price amounts. That the ratio is actually talking about the homes that sold this month and what they were originally listed for versus what they actually closed at. So at 96%, that means homes were coming down in price by about 4% when they were sold. And this is why this is telling us that negotiation is still definitely part of the conversation, especially when homes are overpriced and have been sitting on the market for a while. That's also why pricing strategy matters more than ever, because buyers aren't just looking at homes, they're looking at whether the price matches the value. And if it doesn't, they walk away. Now let's talk about what type of market we're in and where we're headed, because this is the number that's going to tell us who has the leverage. So when we're looking at what type of market we're in, we need to look at 2 things, the months of inventory and the absorption rate. And just think of the months of inventory tells us how long it would take for all the current homes on the market to sell based on how quickly they were selling. And the absorption rate is telling us just that, how quickly they were actually selling. And I always like to use a cookie analogy when kind of explaining the 2 differences. So imagine a big cookie jar, and let's say there's about 30 cookies in the jar. And let's say there were 10 cookies that were eaten that month. So if there were 10 cookies eaten every single month and there were 30 cookies, that means it would take 3 months for all of those cookies to be gone, right? So that means we have 3 months of inventory. Whereas the absorption rate talks about those 10 cookies and what that represents from the whole 30 cookies, right? So that would be 10 divided by 30 cookies. That's about 1/3 or 33% of the cookies that were eaten that month. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference between the 2. So let's talk about this month in December of 2025, what those numbers look like. Now in November, Ione came in at 3.6 months of inventory and 28% absorption rate. So what that means for inventory, anything from 3 to 6 months is considered a balanced or neutral market. And then for the absorption rate, anything between 16.67 and 33.33% is also considered a balanced market. So December's numbers are telling us that the market where buyers still have options, but sellers are not fighting as much of an uphill battle as they were for the month of November, where we were heavily in a buyer's market with 8 months of inventory and the absorption rate at 12.5%. So in real life, this means buyers are still picky, but homes that are priced with today's market in mind can still sell. So this is why I'm telling you sellers that pricing and position matter more than ever, because even in a balanced market, buyers aren't overpaying just because it's on the market. Now let's talk about days on market, because this is where a lot of sellers feel the shift first. In December, homes took about 74 days on average to sell. This is up from 60 days this time last month, and it is significantly up from 28 days this time last year. Longer days on market don't mean automatically that buyers disappeared. It just means that they're taking more time and are more selective. So any homes that are overpriced, outdated, or both, they may pass on or take longer to decide. I also watch CDOM, which is the cumulative days on market, which is basically the total time a home has been on the market, even if it was canceled and then relisted, or if it went pending and went back on the market for whatever reason. This CDOM is going to tell us a much bigger story, whereas the days on market would just start over at 0. So this month I'm seeing the days on market and the CDOM both at the same 74 days on market, which is telling us that homes are just taking longer overall, not necessarily bouncing in and out of escrow when they sell. Now let's talk about everyone's least favorite topic, mortgage rates, because whether you love or hate them, the rates still influence what buyers can afford and how confidently they can feel making offers. So throughout December, Freddie Mac weekly average for a 30-year fix was about 6.19%, which kept monthly payments higher than what buyers want still right now. And it's a big reason why they're staying selective. But one important reminder, that rate that you personally get depends on the type of loan you're getting, your down payment amount, your credit score, and your overall profile. So the best way to get the number that may be what you get for your rate is to talk to a lender and talk through your options. Now that we've gone through all the numbers, let's talk about what they actually mean, whether you're buying, selling, or a homeowner keeping your eye on the market. For buyers, December shows a market where you still have options, but the window for taking your time isn't as wide as it felt last month. Inventory dropped down to 25 homes for sale. This is compared to 32 homes this time last month. With the market sitting in a more balanced range, the best strategy right now is to stay selective, but be ready to act quickly when a home is priced and checks all of your boxes. For sellers, even though buyers are still cautious, you're not competing with the flood of new listings, because in December there were only 2 new homes that hit the market. But homes are still taking longer to sell at 74 days on average, which means pricing and presentation matter from day one if you want to avoid sitting, chasing reductions, or losing momentum. For homeowners, December is a good reminder that the market isn't crashing, it's just adjusting and becoming more normal. Values are holding relatively steady, but buyers are picky, and the gap between a well-positioned home and an overpriced one is getting bigger, which is exactly the kind of trend you want to understand early, whether you're planning to sell soon or just keeping tabs on your home's value. If you have any questions about how these December numbers apply to your situation, whether you're buying, selling, or planning ahead, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to always sit down with you, walk through the numbers, and help you map out a smart next step that actually makes sense for you. And if you want more local insight like this, plus buyer and seller education and what I'm seeing on the ground here in Ione, make sure to follow along. And I'll be back next month with my January 2026 monthly market update. Stay tuned.